Welcome back to The Explainer. So, if you think back to high school biology, there's probably one phrase permanently lodged in your brain, right? Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. It's an absolute classic. We've all pictured them as these little static jelly beans just dutifully churning out energy so we can move our muscles or, I don't know, digest our lunch. But going through Rob Coe's fascinating work on the feedback mechanism of evolution, I realized something wild. Treating mitochondria like dumb, passive cellular batteries, it completely misses one of the most profound biological realities of our time. These microscopic structures aren't just powering our bodies, they're actually designing them. Today, we're exploring some genuinely groundbreaking research that flips the entire script on how life adapts. And honestly, it's going to completely change how you view your own biology. Okay, let's dive into this.
Which brings us to a massive question. What if survival of the fittest is literally only half the story? For well over a century, traditional evolutionary dogma has been absolutely laser-focused on genes, random genetic mutations, and natural selection acting on fully grown adult organisms. The classic idea is pretty straightforward, right? An animal is born with a totally random mix of traits, it goes out into the wild, and the environment acts like this unforgiving obstacle course. The environment just selects the winners, who happen to be lucky enough to survive, and ruthlessly filters out the rest. It's just random chance meeting external pressure. But what if that is strictly the second half of the game? What if, in our total obsession with DNA, we've been missing the absolutely crucial first half of the whole evolutionary process?
To really understand what we've been missing, we have to talk about a concept called evolution by mitochondrial developmental priming, or EMDP for short. The old view basically tells us, you get your genes, mutations happen randomly, and boom, that's the absolute end of the blueprint. You just cross your fingers and hope those random traits work out. But the new reality, it is vastly more dynamic. The environment isn't just some external obstacle course waiting for you at birth, it's actually an active participant in your formation while you're still developing. The environment works directly with your biology to create what's called a developmental bias. Imagine if the obstacle course itself could somehow send signals to a runner, helping them build out their fast-twitch muscle fibers before the race even started. That's developmental bias. The environment is physically shaping the traits of the organism way before natural selection ever gets a chance to weigh in.
And to really grasp how massive this paradigm shift is, we got to rewind. Let's look back at the immense timeline of life on Earth. Because for literally billions of years, life was stuck in a massive rut. Earth was essentially just a giant, stagnant pond of single-celled microbes. Now, sure, we had incredible biochemical diversity, but physically, life remained entirely simple. And why is that? Well, it was because of a hard, unforgiving, energetic ceiling. Energy production was constrained strictly to the cell's outer membrane, its surface area. As a cell gets bigger, its volume grows way faster than its surface area, which means it quickly runs out of power to sustain itself. Without the sheer energy required to support complex physical traits, layered tissues, or long developmental programs, life just sort of structurally stagnated. Until, billions of years in, we hit the ultimate turning point, the emergence of mitochondria.
Suddenly, by internalizing energy production, mitochondria removed the single greatest limiting factor in the history of life, usable energy per cell. Cells didn't just get a bigger gas tank here, they gained this unprecedented ability to produce massive amounts of power deep inside their own structures. They completely bypassed those old surface area constraints. They finally gained the ability to control exactly when, where, and how that energy is deployed. And this energetic expansion? It was the absolute prerequisite for complex life. Without it, you simply cannot build complex physical traits. I mean, think about it. It takes a monumental amount of energy to grow limbs, to wire a brain, to develop a cardiovascular system. Mitochondria provided the raw power needed to finally smash right through that single-celled ceiling.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a quote from the source text that demands a total shift in our perspective. It moves us way beyond just power production. It says, far from being passive power plants, mitochondria function as environmental interpreters. I mean, let that sink in for a second. This completely shatters that old high school myth. Mitochondria are not just sitting around blindly burning fuel to churn out ATP. They are incredibly dynamic biological translators. They are constantly actively listening to the outside world and then translating those external conditions into internal developmental signals. They are the literal bridge between the environment you live in and the biology you are constructing.
And the sheer amount of real-time data they're collecting? It's staggering. We're talking nutrient availability, oxygen levels, ambient temperature, toxins, even the spikes and dips of stress hormones in the bloodstream. Think of mitochondria like foremen on a highly complex biological construction site. Instead of just mindlessly supplying electricity to the cranes and the drills, these cellular foremen are out there checking the weather. They're actively sensing a sudden drop in temperature, a scarcity in supply chains, localized toxins, or high stress levels in the surrounding environment. They take all that data, and then they decide exactly how the building should be constructed to best survive those exact specific conditions.
So, this brings us to a genuinely mind-bending causal chain of events. Step 1, the outside environment changes. Step 2, that environmental input directly alters the mitochondrial state. It changes its energy output, its shape, even the signaling molecules it releases. Step 3, those mitochondrial outputs act directly on your epigenetic regulation. They physically alter the chemical tags on your DNA, fundamentally biasing how your genes are expressed. And finally, step 4, that totally alters your developmental trajectory. This is where it gets highly tangible, guys. If those mitochondrial foremen sense constant cold and stress from a mother's environment, they actually adjust the epigenetic dials to physically build an offspring with a denser coat of fur, or maybe a lower metabolic baseline so it can hoard fat to survive a famine. Through this exact pathway, mitochondria physically shape traits so the organism is perfectly adapted to the world it's about to be born into without altering a single sequence of DNA.
And we can actually see this happening most powerfully during early development, right there in the womb. So while the embryo's basic processes are running, while the cells are dividing and differentiating and organs are initially forming, it's the mitochondria that are actively deciding on the tissue allocation. They're constantly modulating growth rates to match the signals they're getting from the outside world. They even influence physical symmetry and determine the baseline resilience of the nervous system to future stressors. They're quite literally sculpting the physical architecture of the organism while it's under construction. It's this highly coordinated dance, really, where the environment is actively whispering instructions to the developing embryo, and the mitochondria are the ones carrying out those physical alterations.
Just to understand how deeply dependent we are on this whole system, all we have to do is look at organisms that lack mitochondria entirely. Without them, organisms remain incredibly simple. They can only engage in reactive adaptation, which basically means they just react to the environment in real time as mature single cells. They have very short, rigid developmental programs. They can never evolve complex body plans or sustain long, highly tuned gestational processes. Developmental priming, this absolutely incredible ability to pre-adapt an organism's physical traits to its future environment, requires massive regulatory control and enormous energetic capacity. Seriously, mitochondria are the only reason complex body plans even exist in the first place.
Now here is exactly why this matters to you directly. Because mitochondria are passed down almost exclusively through the mother's egg, you inherited vastly more than just a random mix of DNA, you inherited a metabolic state. Through a process called preloaded priming, your mother's environmental imprint literally conditioned your early development. Your own personal stress thresholds, your biological baselines, your metabolic traits, they were heavily calibrated decades ago by the exact environment your mother was experiencing, translated right through her cellular interpreters. You didn't start your life as a neutral blank slate, no way. You started preconditioned, heavily shaped by the world before you even consciously experienced it. This requires a complete paradigm shift in how we understand our own existence. We are completely moving away from a model of traditional selection, the old idea that evolution just waits around to filter through finished, randomly mutated forms. Instead, we're looking at a feedback mechanism of evolution. So the crucial point is that evolution is developmentally informed. The environment doesn't just passively wait at the finish line to see who survives the race. It participates actively in the womb. It works directly through our mitochondria to bias and shape our physical traits, preloading our adaptations before we ever even take our first breath.
Which leaves us with a final, deeply profound question to consider. We now know for sure that our mitochondria are the active architects of our developmental possibility. They constantly convert the environment into biology. So as we surround ourselves with a rapidly, radically changing modern environment, synthetic diets, unprecedented chronic stressors, artificial light, all these entirely new biological inputs, we have to ask ourselves, what exactly are modern environment designing for the next generation? Really think about that for a second. The blueprints are being rewritten right now in real time. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.